I've potentially made one of the greatest developments in zombies high rounding history. What I've discovered is basically a campaign difficulty DVAR that affects health regen speed, red screening, and trap damage on zombies, as well as a couple other smaller things. To be clear, I'm not the first person who's ever discovered this, but I think before now it wasn't known that this worked on Black Ops 1 and affected health regen. As far as I know, before this, people only thought that it affected red screens. Now, I had heard something about this, but I understood it under the context of I had heard that in World at War on console, on certain maps, that this campaign DVAR could be a thing. But as far as I know, I'm the person who discovered how big this is and that it affects all of Black Ops 1. First, I'm going to tell you how to do it and how it affects the game. Basically, all you have to do is load up the campaign, select a difficulty, and quit out. Depending on the difficulty you select, it affects the game differently. This even works in co-op. All you have to do to make it work in co-op is have the host do this, and then all the effects that I'm about to describe work in co-op as well. There are 4 difficulties: Recruit, Regular, Hardened, and Veteran. Regular is the same as normal with 2.5 second regen times and red screens at 20% health or 50 health when you have Juggernaut. There are a few exceptions, but most of the traps do the same damage in each difficulty. That includes all the electric traps, the fire traps on Ascension, or the fire trap on Kino der Toten. Now those traps do 10 in Recruit, 16 in normal/regular, 30 in Veteran, and 47 in Hardened. The pattern is basically in Recruit they do about a third less than normal, in Hardened they do about double of normal, and Veteran they do about triple normal. In normal, the turret trap does 12, the napalm zombie fire does 12, and the Shinonuma flogger does 25 on its first hit. Alright, let's talk about Recruit. On Recruit, basically you red screen at 1% of your health, so literally 1 health without Jug and 2 with, basically non-existent in any normal setting. Traps also only do 10 damage, the normal ones. The others, the damage is more varied, and I'll show it here on screen. But the big downside is instead of regenerating back to full health when you're not red screened in 2.5 seconds, it takes 3 seconds. Due to the slower regeneration, Recruit isn't the best, but could be used on specific trap maps to the reduced damage, and certain specific situations where not red screening would be quite useful. Alright, Hardened. You now take double trap damage and red screen at 75 health instead of 50, which means 3 zombie hits or 2 zombie hits and 1 explosive are enough to red screen you when they weren't before. But it has the major upside of healing in 1.2 seconds instead of 2.5 when you're not red screened. I need to note you actually red screen at 50% health on Veteran, not 40% like I say, so that's 125 with Jug and 50 without, not 40% like I say. Sorry this is so late, but I was already like 95% done with the video when I just noticed this. Veteran is very similar to Hardened, but with triple trap damage and red screening at 100 health. It has the same health regen rate, so there seems to be little to no benefit of running it. We're mostly going to be talking about Hardened, although it does seem like Recruit could have some uses on certain trap maps. Because of the incredible regen speed, Hardened will generally be the best difficulty to play, unless there are traps that you run through a lot in certain situations. I do appreciate that each difficulty has some downsides, meaning there are a variety of difficulties you can play on different maps, and that one difficulty isn't going to be the best for all maps. I certainly wouldn't play something like 5 3.0 and Hardened. I do genuinely think that in most situations, it makes the game more fun and a better overall experience. Now, while it does make the game easier, not as much as you might think. I think for good players, it will help with consistency and make the game more fun and generally just better. But with bad players, it might not help as much because those players would often face situations where they would die whichever difficulty they were playing. Now, when testing Hardened, I was playing Shang Semtex strat on Strat Tester, and it made a much better experience. Normally on Shang Semtex, some of my deaths are my fault, but some others don't feel like there's much my fault and are just more crazy crap happening or partially unavoidable. When playing the same strategy on Hardened, my deaths were my fault. I could play generally faster and more consistently, and when I did die, it was my fault. It reduces RNG aspects and increases the skill cap. I understand that some players would be worried it makes the game easier, and in some cases it does, but I think it also allows for more skill expression and a higher total skill ceiling. I think players should also want this because it allows for certain maps to be played faster and reach higher rounds on them. One example is on Ascension. You could certainly play the early rounds in Power Room faster, but also later on you could hit certain boxes faster. Now, I also think the 75 health red screens are just generally better for the game. Now, you're obviously used to a red screen where if you're red screened, it means getting hit by a zombie once means you're dead. And in this case, if you get 3 hit red screen and you get hit again, that may feel weird, but I think after you get used to it, you'll realize that it's better. This is because at 75 health, it means you'll never be confused and get one shot when you're not red screened. For example, if you're playing in normal or regular and you get hit by one zombie and shoot yourself with 2 explosives, you will be one shot, but you won't be red screened. 75 health is actually the perfect red screen because it's the exact amount of damage an explosive does. This means that if you're not red screened, you can't be one shot by a zombie or explosive, and if you are red screened, you might be one shot. I think this is generally better and more consistent. Also, once you think about it, it's nice to know when you've gotten hit 3 times by a zombie. Now, will this be allowed for runs on ZWR? I hope so, but I sort of doubt it. But I hope that we could perhaps reach a middle ground. We have 3 options for how this could be added to ZWR. First, it could be banned absolutely. Second, it could be allowed completely. Or third, we could allow it in between where it's sort of like categories. I'm thinking the best solution would be on BO3, when you select a map and category, you can cycle between no gums, classics, and megas. It should be like that, where you can select between normal / regular or recruit or hardened or even maybe veteran, although not including veteran could reduce the bloat of categories, and veteran doesn't seem like the optimal strategy on any map. But it is interesting for a challenge because you get red screened in 1 hit from a zombie without Jug. It's funny because I had seen something like this without ever realizing. When I played World at War on console without Jug, I would get red screened in 1 hit because the DVAR was set to veteran by default, I guess. Now, this does affect World at War as well, but to a lesser extent, and that's because Shinonuma and Verruct's Jug override the system, so you can only do it on Derice or on maps without any Jug. Anything without Jug, Hardened is probably the best for because you have the fast regen without getting red screened in 1 hit, but you should be careful, a nade will red screen you without Jug. I just want to talk a little bit more about why I think this should be allowed in the game. First, variety. It has a variety of new things you can play and different ways you can play. On many maps and categories, Hardened is just going to be the way to go, but I don't think that's true about all maps. I think some maps, such as 5, you could play on Recruit, Hardened, or Normal and have viable strategies on each that could contest with very high rounds. I also think it just makes sense to add. If you ignore the fact that people have been playing one way for a really long time and probably won't want to change, it just makes sense to add. It's something that's really easy to do, a DVAR just like Dead Ops Arcade, and generally makes the game better or at least more interesting. Also, if you separate each category into the separate difficulties, like how BO3 is separated into no gum, classics, and megas, I think everybody could be happy because even the players who like the way it is now can play that way if they still want to. I think in any objective sense, the game gets better when you allow this change, and you could even argue that just letting people play whatever is the most optimal would actually be best, and that the only reason that this will probably get voted down is because people are stale, stagnant, and don't like change. That is not a good reason to vote that this should be banned. I'm just hoping that people can see how much this changes and adds variety and makes the game potentially better, and sees that this may breathe life back into a game that isn't doing so well right now. I found another problem, and that problem is enforcement. On World at War console version, the DVAR for campaign difficulty saves, meaning you load up zombies, it will have the same difficulty DVAR as last time. For me, this was veteran. I loaded up, it was always 1 hit red screens, but when I changed it to hardened, I closed the game, reopened it, it had all the hardened effects, faster regen and red screens with 75 damage. This means that every console run should be looked at with suspicion until you can tell that they never healed in less than 2.5 seconds between hits. You also need to watch out for 4 hits without a red screen on Derice. This is another reason to not ban this because enforcing this would be extremely difficult. It should at least be legal on World at War, especially since there are probably many runs made on console on the leaderboards that people didn't even realize they were using this campaign difficulty DVAR. Unfortunately, this is a thing on BO1 as well. Luckily, Hardened and Veteran can't be activated accidentally, But I was able to activate Recruit, close the game, reopen it, and Recruit was still applying, without even having to go into the campaign. I often played World at War and BO1 and got frustrated by both health systems. I played a lot of Writeup, where you heal very fast but only have 160 health, and BO1 where you heal much slower but have a lot more health. I always thought we could reach some sort of better middle ground, and this hardened difficulty is literally that better middle ground. If we do vote on this, I think it's important that we vote on it in a way that makes it fair to both sides. I think it would be important to say vote on it, allow it in categories, or not at all first. And if people vote to allow it in categories, then proceed with farther votes. But if you just start out with a vote that's either allow it outright or deny it outright, then obviously not allowing it would win that vote. Before I end this video, I just want to thank a couple people for help. First and foremost, I want to thank a user on Twitch by the name of Tigerbait. He came into my chat and described this effect working in World at War. He said it wouldn't work on Verruct or Shinonuma with that jug, but otherwise it would work and could be very helpful. He led me to discover that it would also work on BO1, affecting health regen, which as far as I know, nobody else had known before that. I also have to thank ZFreaker and Prompt for helping me with testing. It's funny, I might have discovered this, or at least realized that this was a thing almost 5 years ago, except when I went to test it on World at War, my campaign didn't work, and I didn't have a console handy, so I was like, whatever, kind of forgot about it. Thank you for watching, I appreciate the consideration, and if you notice any other changes that happen when you increase the difficulty in zombies, I would appreciate you commenting them, and I will also write in the description any future discoveries made about this difficulty.